Good afternoon. So I got going a little bit late here today. Had a bunch of stuff here to do this morning, but back online right now. A lot of people tell me they watch these at different times anyhow, rather than just live. So I figured I'd put this up. So yeah, had a horrible shooting today, and this shooting kind of reminds me of what's been attempted to be happening with a lot of people. We've had this clash here with defund the police, let crime run rapid, and give them violin lessons and yoga lessons, and hopefully they'll come around, right? Well, that hasn't been working either, right? And I also can see the point of there's a lot of, people get unjustly treated, like a lot of people get convicted who are innocent. So it's a tough thing, this whole societal justice thing. But it kind of brings me into another topic, which is a universal justice thing. And of course, that really gets into that word we all fear called karma, right? All right. We hear about this in Vedic astrology all the time. Karma. Wow. Is there, any consequences for our actions, right? Well, it's an interesting subject because the religions have gone hard one way and society is going hard another way. So, and there's some reality in between, and that's not an easy one to determine because, when innocent people get killed, whether it's in crazy shootings like this, wars, et cetera, you got to scratch your head and go, why? Why? It's just senseless. And, if somebody wants to, kill themselves, I guess that's not good either, because a lot of times people end up in multiple dimensions trapped for the period of time that it said that they were going to live. But at least you're not taking somebody else with you. Not that that's good either, taking your own life. But it's very, the planet is a tough place to be. Well, that kind of brings me, I had a little show and tell today that I wanted to go into. And there's a very interesting book. Many people may have heard of Manly P. Hall. He ran the Philosophical Research Society. I got a chance to meet him when he was quite on in years. For anybody who's not familiar with him, he wrote the book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And it's kind of an interesting story here that I want to get into because Manly P. Hall was born in the 1800s. And he was giving a talk in 1916 in a church in downtown Los Angeles, back when LA actually was the city of angels. And some people were sitting in the crowd watching, and apparently they were from a secret society known the Rosicrucians, right? You may or may not have heard of them. We've heard of the Masons, the Skull and Bones, all these different things, these Egyptian secret societies, the Knights Templar, right? On and on. And many of these secret societies have woven in and out of time. And of course, the Masons is probably one of the better known ones. But the Rosicrucians was believed to be after Christian Rosenkreuz, right? And they found his body in a tomb and it never decayed. And of course, we hear this a lot about very sacred people, that their flesh doesn't decay, their bodies stay intact for hundreds of years. And it's very mysterious when this happens. Well, what's interesting and why I'm going into all this is because Manly P. Hall was approached by some people, and I believe he was bequeathed all this knowledge from several secret societies. It's interesting, the actor Robert Mitchum he was a ghostwriter for the astrologer who later became Ronald Reagan's astrologer, which was Carol Reiter. Carol Reiter used to meet Ronald Reagan at Nate and Al's in Beverly Hills on certain Wednesdays when he was governor. And again, a huge history of all of this. So long story short, the book here that I want to show is a book called The Work of Invisible Helpers. And it was written by Amber M. Tuttle. Now, this book gets some criticism because people have read it and said, oh, it's a little airy-fairy, right? That's because she's rewriting a lot of stories that were handed down to the Rosicrucian and other secret society lore. But I have to say, this is a really interesting book. Why? Because it talks about catastrophes. It also talks about karmic happenings. Not in any way that am I saying certain people get killed or murdered or what have you, simply because of karma. It may be new events happening. And we all have free will, right? People get angry, they get crazy. But it shows in this book countless stories about catastrophes. There's literally sections in it. Gets into karmas that happen to people who do really evil things. And, we see a lot of people do horrible things on this planet, right? And they treat people like crap, or they betray people, or do all these different things that are very, very not good, especially violence and horrible things and suppression. And, some of the stuff we hear about with child trafficking, sex trafficking, et cetera, gets pretty dicey. So long story short, this book gets into something about they call the body or you could say the auric field that surrounds the body. And again, one of my favorite guys that I always mention on a consistent basis, and if anybody wants to go down a rabbit hole, this book, The Magus of Strovolos, gets into this par excellence. It's literally a book that talks about who we are and the thought form elementals that we create around us in our auric field. So this is really, really cool stuff to get into. And I'll tell you a couple other books that I always mention, but I haven't for a while. These two books, this is called Esoteric Teachings, which was also put out by the Magus of Strovolos. And then there's another book called Esoteric Practices. These two books were actually companion volumes that were written by the Magus of Strovolos. And Esoteric Practices particularly trains the lower conscious mind to focus. And what he's really training one to do is realize that you emit thought form elementals out of the third eye chakra. And he gives a number of different exercises where you visualize things and then you create an astral replica of that, meaning he'll have you examine, whatever object it is, and then recreate the astral thing. And this is not new. This has been taught in mystery schools for thousands of years. The Tibetan lamas, many of the ones that were murdered by the Chinese in Tibet, would take people up into the mountains and they would have them learn concentration exercises and they would build elementals. Well, for anybody who's familiar with Reiki and hands-on healing and all these different modalities, this is directing etheric energy which surrounds our auric field, which is really cool stuff because we're all capable of that. We hear about hideous stuff where this, kid today who shot up all these kids and killed 2 little innocent kids, horrible. And you just wonder, how in the hell can somebody do something like that? And even when you look at war, it's just as they want to make war sound, war is really hell. It's kind of hell on earth. In fact, Malachi Martin had talked about that, how he saw so much demonic energy around wars. And the evil spirits love to get us fighting and in war. They love that stuff. So, and it's really something we're all kind of dealing with. We're in the center with free will and consciousness, dealing with good and evil all the time. We deal with it in our personal lives. We see it in the world. Turn on the news. That's all you hear about, right? So what's interesting about these books and what brings to light is your conscious mind's effect on something known as resonance. Now, Abraham Hicks talked about this as the law of attraction. And isn't that interesting? The law of attraction really is the law of resonance. It's like a tuning fork. I used to study acoustics and also do a lot of acoustical design stuff. And in fact, this is why certain instruments sound so incredible. If you have a vibrating object and something else in the room vibrates at that same frequency or a harmonic of that frequency, it too will vibrate. And this is the magic that we hear in violins and pianos. I mean, you ever listen to a Bosendorfer piano or a Steinway or some of these other incredibly built, sounding boards on instruments, including Martin guitars and Gibson guitars. They're stunning. They're stunning how they sound. Well, this is the same thing that happens with thought forms that go out and permeate our aura. And why I bring all this up is that shooting. I was just watching it on the news and I'm thinking to myself, how can someone get to that point where they want to go kill a bunch of other people just maliciously like that? Well, the work of invisible helpers, as well as the Magus of Strovolos, touches upon these things. And how it touches upon them is the soul, after, so many repetitive, you could say, resonances, what we think or what we believe, you start to attract that kind of energy around you. And again, it's really, Abraham Hicks called it the law of attraction. I call it the law of resonance, because it's what it is. You will resonate with what you vibrate with. And it's very interesting to study our thought patterns, because we all resonate and vibrate with different things. And it sneaks in on us, and we all have inherent traits. And again, it's really comes down to self-introspection or analysis. And when you see some disturbed individual like this, and we hear about this all the time, this is where we get into mind control, where you literally have evil people that mind control people to do certain things. That sounds incredible, but I've actually talked to many people who were sucked into situations like that. The whole world is mind control in one shape, form, or another. It's just a matter of which kind of mind control are you buying into. This, again, gets right back into what I've been speaking about so many times, is the lower conscious mind. When you look at the lower conscious mind, in the book called the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐞𝐭, it is actually referred to as the nefesh. That's a strange word in Aramaic and Hebrew. It simply means the lower conscious mind is an attenuator interface to this physical, three-dimensional, five-space world, or six-space world. So what really is interesting about that is the work of invisible helpers, and some of these other texts, particularly the Magus of Strovolos, gets into astral travel. Or these invisible helpers are human beings who've learned how to build an astral body that they pour their consciousness into, and they're in a semi-sleep state, and they're traveling around, and actually, the more advanced they get, they're actually able to physically manifest and save someone. How many of us can say, oh, I was almost killed, it seemed like something moved me out of the way, or a hand reached in, or something prevented me from a catastrophe, whatever it might have been, right? And I know I've had that happen a lot. And, when I was a little kid, I astral traveled. I think I was about somewhere between, I can't remember the age, but 4 to 6 years old. I had astral traveled down to some little pets that I had, to little guinea pigs. And one was dead. And it was exactly the way it was when I woke up and went down, rushed down to see that. And my mother said, you astral traveled. So this is nothing new. It's something we're all capable of. And again, it puts a focus back on this thing, the conscious mind, because astrology is a modulator. There's no question astrology is really accurate. But we have something that's the most powerful thing in the universe, probably what created the universe, and that is consciousness, divine consciousness. And that is a really interesting thing to be aware of, because we all get wrapped up in our daily lives. And some people get really resonant with very negative things. And again, we see psychiatry, psychology. Psychiatry will try and medicate it away or rationalize it away. Psychology will try and make that person analyze these traits. But I've had a lot of fun interaction with psychiatrists and psychologists, both, who talk about how these patterns are so deeply ingrained in the soul. And I've actually talked to several psychiatrists who are in the prison systems. And, they're kind of bound with their licenses at how far they can go into this esoteric stuff. But a lot of them talk about how we know these people are possessed. They're literally possessed. And this is, again, many of the texts that I've mentioned, particularly this one, Freeing the Captives, which was written by a medical doctor who got sick and tired of pharmaceuticals and surgeries and said something else is causing these ailments, and did a series of clinical healings on people. And she recorded them. This is an amazing book. And it essentially, in my opinion, proves that there are other forces that impinge upon us. And this gets into clearing. This also gets into habitual patterns that can be done, that we can learn to do. And I may put out a video sometime on just some of the basic techniques of clearing and centering your aura. Some really cool stuff. And it's with sacred geometry, and very fascinating stuff. But we can get into that sometime. But I just wanted to bring this up because when I saw that horrible situation today. And of course, we see horrible situations every day, right? I mean, look at this. We got people all over the world dying in some conflict, war, etc. And again, we hear a lot of crazy stuff that just goes on in normal society. What doesn't make the news oftentimes is very disturbing. I'll say that. So, and you wonder why. And a lot of it is thought form elementals that are shaping, or you could say, possessing the lower conscious mind. And this is something that I think, until society addresses it in this esoteric fashion, along with the regular things that they're doing with law and incarceration and all that, I think we're going to continue to see certain people always have these issues. And, so it's again, one side wants to give them violin lessons in yoga, which conceptually is not bad, except they're going to keep doing it. Right. So, and the other side wants to lock them up forever, which, that keeps them from hurting people. But somewhere in the middle, if you read the Magus of Strovolos, you'll see how this is possession by sometimes not only elementals, but demonic entities or other spiritual beings that were alive before. They're called, a lot of people call them imburers or maziks. There's all kinds of names in different cultures for these, where literally the auric field gets possessed. Read again, the work of Invisible Helpers, an incredible book, the Magus of Strovolos, which is stunning. Again, that book will blow your hair back. This is a book I'd love to throw out of helicopters and have everybody read before they die, because it's an amazing book. And Freeing the Captives as well. Esoteric Teachings, Esoteric Practices, love that book. And of course, Invisible Helpers. And here's another little gem that I might mention. This is a book called Words of Truth. It's a series of lectures that Daskalos' daughter, Panyota, had put together. And it's really a great read because it's short little stories. But I loved him because he would bust your chops. He was very cantankerous. He would always, go right in there and say, wait a minute, you're being hypocritical or whatever. This is a great book. These books are not easy to get. You can a lot of times get them on Amazon, but the other place you can get them on, I call it Amazon, is stoaseries.com. And that's STOA series.com. You'll find, though, when you go there, the website is now been retired, but there's another link you can click on that brings you to the archives. And in that archives, you can go to products or books or whatever it is, and you can select and find these books. They're still there and still available. Buy them before they're gone, because Daskalos was amazing. He died in 2001 of a stroke. And when you read the Magus of Strovolos, you'll see just what an incredible being he was. And you'll also read stories in there you'll not read anywhere else. Quite amazing. For anybody who's a Christian, you'll actually find there's some real truths in there that are pretty amazing. And Jewish people too, all religions, Hindu. I mean, he was non-secular, but he was very Christian orientated. But what was interesting was his mystical Christianity in a par excellence way. Absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. No dogma there. There's a great story in the Magus of Strovolos. The two priests came over and accosted him. They took him over to their church and said, put your hand on the Bible and swear that you believe in God. And he says, of course I believe in God. Right? The phone rings. And it's the archbishop who's their boss, the two priests' boss. And the archbishop says, what are you guys doing? So, well, we're interrogating that devil worshiper, the Magus of Strovolos. And he says, you fools, let him go. He says, I take classes from him. So the book is not only entertaining, but it's so knowledgeable, or you could say conscious expanding in the way it deals with our conscious mind. And again, we see what happens when a conscious mind goes awry. We get people trying to take over the world. It's like a James Bond movie, right? The new one world order. And then you get people killing people senselessly and committing crimes. And this is really the possession of very negative elementals and sometimes demonics. Demonics are often more in the background, is what I find in clearing. And again, if you ever crack open this book, Freeing the Captives, absolutely amazing. The stories within that. Another one I didn't put up is The Unquiet Dead. I've done that before, but that's an amazing book. So I just wanted to go into that little tirade here because it's really interesting. Again, we have to remember we're spiritual beings incarnate into these physical meat suits called bodies. And the conscious mind is not us. It is literally an interface. And again, I go back to that session that I did with Ella a long time ago, where we had this lady on whose son was, quote unquote, considered autistic or challenged, right? And then they found out once they got into speech to text, which is a wonderful tool that a doctor had developed that allows these autistic children or very challenged children, however you want to call them, to communicate. And they find out these kids are psychic. They can talk to animals. They can read people's minds. You see what I'm saying? So the conscious mind is literally an attenuator. And it's a wonderful thing in some ways that we've all been blocked from seeing angels and spirits, because we'd probably walk in the walls and couldn't drive cars if we could see all the astral entities that are around us. But on the other hand, it also allows for the lower conscious mind to attract all kinds of things if it's not, aware of what we're attracting through our repetitive thought patterns. And it's very easy for me to say we all have our traits, and it's really an interesting thing because the lower conscious mind is a very interesting mechanism that we all have. And that is the lower, you could say, body that's going to leave as we exit, known as death. And that integrates into that consciousness, and all the elementals surrounding it go with where we're going to end up. So very interesting stuff. And it has a lot to do with the astral worlds that we enter into. And this is deep stuff because, again, the soul is created way up here. And the 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐸 world, which is where this line is, kind of in the middle, you can see number 3, that is where time and space and materialism is believed to really manifest. And they claim there are many, 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 many other worlds. Again, there could be 49 parallel universes, 49 subdimensions, but we tend to get trapped down into this lower world of incarnation here. So it's deep, deep stuff. And this is a reality machine. It really is, of time and space. Very, very interesting stuff. So on the other note, I just wanted to mention, we're going to have a first quarter moon this Saturday, right at about 8:30, I believe it's a.m. in the morning. And then, actually, no, what am I saying? It's 11:30 p.m. It's 11:26 p.m. And of course, speaking Pacific Coast time. So we've got that. And then also we've got Uranus making a sextile to Neptune. And that actually happens tomorrow at about 5:09 p.m. And this is very interesting energies because Uranus is very much an eclectic, unusual planet. And when it beholds Neptune, which is kind of a psychic portal, which can have good or ill effects on people psychically, it's a very unusual energy. And it's an unusual time in the world right now. A lot of things are changing. What's also cool is Uranus is going to be in a sustained trine to Pluto all the way up until about the 19th or 20th of September. But why I say sustained is because Uranus is slowly screeching to a halt and stationing from Earth's perspective. And it's doing so in a sustained trine to Pluto. And that's a really cool energy. It's very powerful. Pluto, I think, rules raw power. It always seems to amplify whatever it's with. So expect the unexpected. A lot of unusual things. Trines are usually very positive. And then Uranus stations and goes retrograde on the 5th. But it's still, because Pluto's also retrograde, stays in that sustained trine until about the 19th or 20th. And it's only like within 7 minutes of arc, and then they separate. So this, again, is a very powerful time. As I had mentioned, look at the world. You got Hamas now. Israel's digging in, and they're really going for it to clean out, the whole Gaza Strip. You've still got the bombs dropping over there in Ukraine and Russia. And this peace deal is up in the air. I'm sure you're going to hear sanctions and everything else coming through. I think they're ultimately going to settle this and go into peace. I think, again, as I said, there's a lot more going on with this whole Ukraine-Russia thing than the mind control media even knows about. So there's some pretty deep secrets here. I could tell even by how Trump spoke. A lot of stuff close to the vest. He wouldn't say anything, wouldn't even go near it. And again, we've heard a lot of the rumors. If you jump on the internet, there's a lot of theories out there as to why this situation happened. And again, last but not least, we got to remember what was done way back over a decade ago. The CIA was doing all kinds of stuff in there, putting new governments in, all the stuff with Hillary and Biden and Obama. A lot of stuff went on there. So I'm not justifying anything. I'm just saying this rabbit hole goes deep. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we are not hearing about. And that is probably what's being sorted out before this whole thing ends up, spilling out. And on the other hand, you're also going to see, as I said, I really believe you're going to see serious indictments. And I think indictments that are probably not going to be able to be escaped from. And again, this is this whole Russiagate thing, which I think is going to unravel a ball of yarn that gets deeper and deeper and deeper as the world turns, right? Or as the cycles go. So yeah, very, very, there used to be a soap opera a long time ago in the 60s. Remember that one, As the World Turns? Some people might not remember that, but very powerful. So yeah, that's another big thing that this could precipitate. We're hearing the Fed finances are going to potentially shift here as they're considering lowering interest rates. That could be a manifestation of this Uranus trining Pluto. And it's kind of interesting that they're finally now considering doing that. So a lot of stuff. So, it's a complex little world and it's always evolving and always changing. So, yeah. But anyhow, that's some basic stuff here. And of course, we are heading on the 7th to this full moon, and that's an eclipse. And those are very, very powerful. And again, a lot of information is going to start to unravel on that. So anyways, I'll look at a few comments here. I can't stay a long time today. Again, I've got a lot of stuff on my plate here, but it's fun to do these once in a while. So again, on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So anyway, someone's saying here, can we see a Kenyan be held accountable? That's an interesting thing. I don't know. We could certainly look at that, but it's that's some dicey stuff going on over there. Always has been too. Always has been. And, it's such a shame that that's been used as a testing ground for a lot of diseases, isn't it? So, yeah, nothing to worry about, folks. Just your lovely the One World Order is testing things out. So, yeah, and I think also, too, that's another thing I see with this eclipse coming up. You're going to see information that's been exposed with Radcliffe, Gabbard, DNI Gabbard, and also Kash Patel. I think so much stuff is coming unraveled here. It's going to be really an entertaining fall. It's going to get pretty wild here as it goes. So a lot of comments here that people are making, and we'll see what happens. But I really think that, yeah, this is a good point. Someone just said, oh, Robert Bauer's on here. Well, Robert just said, hi, Robert. Haven't talked to him for a while, but he just said that all attraction and resonance starts with the law of intent, which is really true. And that's a great point he brought up, because law of attraction or resonance is your intent. Be very careful what you direct your mind upon, because, there's nothing wrong with having your fun on the physical plane, but be careful where you go with it, because some people's reality structures really get skewed. And, this has been brought up where very advanced detection techniques where, people start seeing posts on social media, family members can start seeing certain things about individuals. It's a good thing to watch, because a lot of times people exhibit and say what they're thinking. And, it's a shame that it has to go that way, but some people get pretty tweaked. That's what I call it. And, again, this is the repetitive formation of thought form elementals attracting things to you. The Invisible Helpers is a really interesting book because, and this brings me to one last subject I wanted to talk about here. There was a text that was translated. Speaking of secret societies, this was the Secret Order of the Golden Dawn, S.L. McGregor McMathers or Mathers. He found this book. It was a French translation in the library of the Arsenal. In fact, I was over by that in France a number of years ago. And this particular book it was a good translation by Mathers, but it wasn't a true exact translation because it's gone through iterations. The real one was this one. It was called the Book of Abramelin. And this is a really interesting book because we see here, again, back to the law of attraction, law of resonance, all this stuff here, or intent. What the Book of Abramelin talks about is that if a person purifies the auric field for a period of 6 months minimum, he actually advocates 18 months in there. The first year is a kind of, you could say, cleansing period. And then the final 6 months happens from the new moon on the spring equinox, closest to the spring equinox, which many people recognize in religions is called the Passover. Interesting. And then the next 6 moons, which he calls lunations, you ramp up a very purified modality. And at the end, which many people will recognize as Rosh Hashanah, which is the new moon closest to the fall equinox, is when you summons your guardian angel. And if the aura is purified enough, it will come to you. And it will teach you how to control the fourth hierarchy, which many religions refer to as the demonic forces. And those are the cast down spirits. And he claims within this is an incredible book. Just to read it is incredible. And a lot of secrets in this book. But he claims that very few people today would ever achieve it. And this gets into that whole journey of the solar system around the central sun and societal mass consciousness. But there are people who can achieve it, and they can achieve different degrees of it. And of course, this is why we see certain psychics, we see certain intuitives who sometimes get very advanced beings coming to them. Also, some of them don't, and that's the problem. You can get lower beings that trick. But what's great about that book is it puts an awareness on many of the things the Magus of Strovolos talks about. And that is that we're all living in a sea of bombardment of human egoic interaction, which some of it's okay, but we're all mind controlled by what we believe and what we've been exposed to and being products of our environment, which there's nothing wrong with that if you've been in a good environment. And this is what I think makes the diversity and magic of society. But we also have to be very careful who we pick and choose. As the old adage goes, who you hang with is who you are, or what you associate is what you are. So it's really interesting to, keep that lower consciousness centered and aware, and very, very interesting stuff. So anyways, a lot of great comments here. People become the material world and stray from the spiritual world. That's right. Somebody just made that comment. It's a good comment. And, there's a lot of great books about this. I'll show you another book that I really liked. It's called it's kind of hard to see it, but I'll put it up this way. It's called Daimonic Reality. And this gets into all of if I hold it back, it stays in focus right there. There we go. This is a really interesting book. It was put up by Patrick Harper. I don't have it on the screen, but you can see I've read this a little bit, all the tabs, and very interesting research about depossession, about clearing the aura, and about attracting and repelling certain forces and energies. Very, very interesting stuff. And again, this is one of the central themes that's spoken about at the beginning of the work of Invisible Helpers, purifying the aura, etc. Also, the Magus of Strovolos gets into this very, very deeply. It's very interesting. And one of the things I love about the Magus of Strovolos is Markides you can see this was not written by the Magus of Strovolos. It was written by Kyriakos Markides, and he's a great author, but he was very skeptical. He grew up in Cyprus. See, the Magus of Strovolos lived on the island of Cyprus in the city of Strovolos. That's hence why it's named the Magus of Strovolos. Right? And what's so great about this book is Markides, as a child, was told, stay away from the Magus of Strovolos. He must have cohorts with the spirits and the devils, right? Or he couldn't do all the stuff that he does, right? The superstition sometimes that religions throw out things. Well, Markides moved to the United States. He became a professor of sociology. And, again, very linear guy. And then ended up going back on a sabbatical to Cyprus, to his hometown, Strovolos, and he ran into this man healing people, like rebuilding bones, getting rid of cancer, stuff that is just medically impossible. And he said, wow, he said, you're really amazing. He said, I want to write a book about you. He said, I'm on a sabbatical. And he says, can I do that? And the Magus of Strovolos looked at him and said, for the last several lifetimes, you've screwed up so much stuff through your ego that, yeah, you can write this book. And so Markides followed him around with tape recorder, pad, and pencil. Of course, this is back in the 1980s, right before we had all the iPhones and everything, and basically recorded everything and asked a lot of really intelligent questions. That's why this book is so valuable, because of his kind of analytical skepticism. He asked questions that you'd want to ask reading a book like that. So he vicariously kind of plays us as we're reading the book, which is elegant. I mean, there's not another book quite like it. Because I think of the dynamics of how powerful 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭 was. He actually had a portion of the command of the fourth hierarchy, which is deep, deep stuff. And this is one of the mysteries that I think has been sadly lost in many of the religions. And it for some reason seems to be taboo. And, many people are familiar with the Kabbalah, right? But even that, there's the divisions of the practical Kabbalah, the theoretical Kabbalah, right? And all this other stuff. And this is the same thing. You see the same thing in Christianity and in other religions where they had sectioned off. Look at Buddhism. It jumped off from Hinduism, and then somewhere at the root of all these amazing, trails, you find truth. So again, very, very interesting stuff. So, but I really recommend the Magus of Strovolos and the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐿 too. The 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐿 is probably, again, a book that you really would enjoy after you read the Magus of Strovolos, because it's an entirely different viewpoint on who we are, because it actually segments the conscious mind, the spiritual body, and then the sheath called the karmic body, which astrologers know as Saturn. Isn't that interesting? Saturn, the cross over the crescent of the moon. So now we start plugging in here what astrology is and what it isn't. Astrology is the interface of time and space. I always say God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once, right? And what's interesting about these other theologies is you see how it plugs in and why it plugs in. And you also see in some ways why the religion said not to be too dependent on astrology, because you got to keep your central point of consciousness, common sense or self-awareness, introspection, all these words that we've heard many, many avatars use, and they're right to say them. So a lot of cool stuff. And this will be good to see what happens here coming up as we move into this Uranus trine Pluto and sextile Neptune. A lot of fun stuff here coming up. It never stops. So anyways, yeah, somebody's mentioning Daimonic Reality. That's a really good book. Let me tell you, this one will take you down the rabbit hole. If I hold it right, you can actually see the title. Let me put it right side up. There we go. That's the book right there, Daimonic Reality. And again, it's by, who was that by? By Patrick Harper. Good book. I get so many different books. And I had someone give me a book that I wanted to mention. It's in the other room. It came from somebody with a zip code in Tennessee, but it was, we'll get into that another time, but it was about a German priest who was involved with Rudolf Steiner. And this is, of course, right during World War I, and Germany was falling and all the crazy stuff was happening. The bombs were going off and everything. And the unrest that was going on in society. And he was talking about astrology and how it fit with consciousness and many of the other parallels to what's going on in the world. So it was interesting stuff. I haven't really read it, but I've kind of poked around it a little bit. And there's so many ways to look at astrology. You have Vedic astrology, Nadi astrology. You have, so many different systems that are amazing. And in the West too. By the way, one last thing I'll give you here. The moon is void of course by tropical astrology today. It actually goes direct at about 6:30 p.m. today, or 6:39. And this is a big deal. I have so many Vedic quote unquote astrologers and the tropical traditionalists, right? Or the modern tropical. And this is a real dichotomy, because if you're using the tropical zodiac, you'll find the moon is often void of course a lot. What does that mean? It just means it's not making an aspect until it jumps out of that tropical sign. You can get the same thing in sidereal. And you'll talk to a sidereal astrologer, they talk about all these positions of planets from the moon, which is constantly moving. Every 7 days goes through a quarter, right? That's why we have the phases of the moon. And it's an interesting study, because even though I love Vedic astrology, I find the tropical void of course moon things are accurate. It's very, very interesting. In Interrogation, you can really see that. I've had so many people ask questions. Hey, will this happen? Moon's void of course, forget it, it's not going to happen. Or if it does, it'll be delayed. So interesting stuff. And it changes per the signs that you're in. So with that, folks, I got to run. But we had a good time. And yeah, somebody's mentioning here about the Incan civilization and how they had done all kinds of stuff. Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, how they use astrology. Oh, yeah, the Mayan astrology. Bruce Schofield, who I haven't talked to in many years, he's done a lot of research on that, and very interesting. There's nothing like the Vedic and the traditional astrology in terms of its depth and scope. And I also think the documents that have been published on it through the many thousands of years here that have gone by. So not that theirs isn't, but I don't think the Incas and the Mayans printed, or able to print, that society didn't have the development of writing to the degree that we've seen in the West and in the East. So it doesn't mean it wasn't good. It just means we don't have a lot of records of it. And I'm always amazed at one of my favorite astrologers, Guido Bonatti, who lived in the 11th, I think it was the 12th century. And amazing stuff. There's stuff in there, they don't even know where it came from. And he cites all these references. Nobody knows where they are. And again, just because we don't have a document doesn't mean there was an exceedingly advanced knowledge. And this really does seem to be communicated by either extraterrestrial or angelic beings. And I think the latter personally. So anyways, I got to run, folks, but have fun. If you check out any of these books, it's just something to look into, something to expand your mind upon. And it's a lot better than doing crazy stuff like that maniac did this morning to those poor little kids. So it's really important to keep our minds centered. So, all right, you guys all have a good rest of the week. And I might not do a podcast on Saturday. I might actually be doing some stuff here that might cause me, or I'm sorry, Sunday. I meant Sunday. So I have to look into it, but I'll put a post up as to when I'll do something next time. Okay. Because I'm kind of taking a little bit of a breather here. So everybody have a good rest of the week. Thanks for watching.